Have you ever been made to feel less than? Not by strangers, but by your own blood, dressed in silk and superiority. Tell me, what did you do with the humiliation? Because this is the story of what Maya did with hers. London had two kinds of rain, the kind that cleaned and the kind that judged. That evening, the city seemed to be doing both. The Kingsley estate in Hampstead shimmered under a veil of drizzle, its marble driveway polished enough to reflect regret. Inside, waiters in white gloves floated through the grand hall carrying trays of champagne and conversation. Maya Kingsley, only daughter of Charles and Eleanor Kingsley, stood at the top of the staircase, watching it all. Her mother's friends glittered in jewels that caught the chandelier light like applause. Every smile was measured, every compliment scripted. Her engagement ring, delicate, simple, rose gold, looked almost shy against the wealth around her. It wasn't from Cartier or Tiffany. It was from Liam. Liam Tors. A man with ink under his nails, laughter in his voice, and a dream that didn't come wrapped in a trust fund. He ran a small architectural firm in Shoreditch, built homes for people who couldn't afford architects, believed in roofs before reputations. They'd met by accident 2 years earlier when she'd spilled coffee on his sketchbook in a cafe. He'd smiled instead of scowled. That smile had undone her far more efficiently than any proposal could. Now, at the engagement party, she looked for him among the guests. He stood near the back, uncomfortable in his only suit, talking politely to a woman who clearly found him fascinating in the way one might find a friendly waiter fascinating. When their eyes met, he mouthed, "You okay?" She nodded, but her heart whispered something else. This isn't my world anymore. Her father, Charles Kingsley, was the kind of man who spoke in aphorisms that sounded like scripture when you were young, and like manipulation when you grew up. He was London's latest philanthropist of the year, a man whose foundation built libraries, funded scholarships, and occasionally destroyed people with impeccable manners. He loved the image of virtue, not virtue itself. Maya had tried to believe he'd come around, that he'd see Liam's worth the way she did, not as a resume, but as a soul. But that night, when the string quartet paused and the room quieted for the father's toast, Maya saw it in his face before he even spoke. The same calm precision he used in business meetings, just before closing on a hostile takeover. "Friends," Charles began, voice smooth as his cufflinks, "thank you for joining us on this special evening." He looked at Maya, then at Liam, a pause perfectly timed. The crowd leaned in, anticipating elegance. "My daughter," he continued, "is the heart of this family, the very best of the Kingsley name, which is why I must also be honest. For integrity is not merely what we preach, but what we practice." A ripple of confusion passed through the hall. Maya's stomach tightened. Liam took half a step forward. Charles's tone didn't waver. "It has come to my attention that my daughter's engagement does not reflect the standards this family has always upheld. While we wish her happiness, the Kingsley name cannot be joined with the circumstances beneath its dignity." The silence was exquisite, like art. No gasps, just polished stillness. Someone at the back coughed softly. The orchestra resumed, as if nothing had happened. Maya stood there, heartbeat roaring in her ears. Her father had just disowned her, in front of London's elite, without ever raising his voice. Her mother avoided her eyes. Guests murmured phrases like, "such a shame," and "one must protect legacy." Liam's hand found hers, warm, steady, defiant. She could barely breathe, but she managed a whisper, "Let's go." They walked out together, past the marble pillars, past the whispers, past the generations of approval that suddenly meant nothing. Outside, the rain didn't judge anymore. It welcomed her. They reached the car park, both drenched. She looked back once, the estate glowing behind them, a shrine to everything hollow. "You don't have to choose me over them," Liam said quietly. "I can't let you lose everything for me." Maya shook her head, a faint, trembling laugh escaping her. "Liam, I'm not losing anything, I'm leaving it." The next morning, her father's assistant delivered a single envelope. Inside, a check unsigned. And a note. You can always come home, alone. She folded it once, tore it in half, and dropped it into the bin. Then she looked at her reflection, no longer a Kingsley, not yet a Tors, and whispered to herself, maybe now, I get to start being someone real. And so she did. 3 weeks later, in a registry office that smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain, she signed her new name with a plastic pen. Her wedding veil slipped sideways, and she laughed because it finally felt right. They said old money never shouts. It hums its cruelty through manners. At the Kingsley Gala, Maya learned just how sharp a hum could be. The night had smelled of champagne and orchids, the kind of evening where chandeliers pretend to be stars. Guests stood in diamonds and entitlement as her father announced, ever so graciously, that his daughter would not be marrying beneath the Kingsley name. The silence that followed was elegant. Nobody gasped. In their world, ruin was meant to be quiet. Maya had stood there, a ghost in a sequin dress, watching her father's smile never falter as he spoke of duty, standards, and heritage. The orchestra had resumed without missing a beat. The strings played as if her heart hadn't shattered into etiquette-approved pieces. They married 3 weeks later. The registry office was on a side street in Camden, beside a bedding shop and a hair salon that hadn't seen a new sign since the 90s. The rain was unromantic, the light unflattering. Still, when Maya stepped out of the taxi, Liam looked at her like she'd brought the sun with her. She wore a pale blue dress she'd found in a thrift shop, a size too big, pinned at the back with safety clips. The bouquet was a bunch of lilies from Tesco. When she laughed, her veil slipped sideways. Liam fixed it with a hairpin he borrowed from the receptionist. The pen she used to sign Maya Tors was cracked, the kind you'd find in a bank lobby. Yet somehow, it felt more real than all the crystal pens she'd ever signed charity checks with. Afterward, they walked along the Thames with soggy chips and tea in paper cups. She'd always imagined her wedding would end in a ballroom. Instead, it ended with pigeons, cold wind, and love that didn't need chandeliers. "Are you happy?" Liam asked. She smiled. "I think I'm alive, maybe for the first time." They found a flat above a bakery, 2 rooms, peeling wallpaper, and ceilings that creaked with gossip. Every morning. The smell of fresh bread rose through the floorboards. Maya said it smelled like hope. Liam said it smelled like rent. They learned to share silence. She learned to cook beans without burning them. He learned how to comfort her when she woke from dreams of chandeliers and polite applause. In the evenings, they'd sit on the fire escape and talk about everything they couldn't afford, not wistfully, but like 2 dreamers sketching blueprints in the air. Some nights Maya would whisper, "Do you ever miss it, the comfort?" Liam would shrug, thoughtful. "I miss hot water that doesn't scream halfway through a shower, but the rest, not really." She would smile into the London fog. Her father had thought Liam was beneath them, but in truth, he was beyond them in decency, in peace, in depth. Her father never called. Her mother sent one letter, wrapped in apology but lined with poison. "Your father still believes you'll come to your senses. Liam is fine, I suppose, but our world is fragile, Maya. I hope you haven't forgotten who you are." Maya didn't reply, but sometimes, on cold nights, she'd take out the letter just to remind herself how far she'd walked from the cage. Meanwhile, Charles Kingsley became a national virtue. His photo appeared in newspapers, on glossy magazine pages, shaking hands with politicians and charity patrons. He'd lost a daughter, yes, but gained a halo. One headline in the Chronicle read, "Charles Kingsley, the man who put Principles above privilege." He spoke about integrity, family values, and the responsibility of breeding. Society applauded. They called him noble for standing firm. "Family," he'd said, "must reflect the standards upon which society stands. Compassion is important, but not at the expense of class." Maya read the interview once, then tore it in half and used it to light the fireplace. Liam found her staring at the flames, expression unreadable. "You okay?" She smiled faintly. I'm just watching a lie burn. Years rolled on quietly, like drizzle over stone. Maya built a small interior design studio, modest but meticulous. She refused to do sterile white-hand gold homes for the rich. Her clients were teachers, nurses, ordinary Londoners who wanted warmth over status. She gave them color. She gave them stories. And slowly, her business began to hum, not loudly, but honestly. When she gave birth to their daughter, Sophia, the midwife said the baby's cry sounded like protest. Maya laughed through tears. "Good," she whispered. "The world needs girls who won't stay quiet." Every time Sophia reached for her mother's face, Maya promised silently that this child would never be made to feel less than. 8 years after the gala, the letter came. Thick cream paper, embossed seal, the handwriting as severe as the man himself. The Kingsley Foundation, charity ball, benefiting children of the underprivileged. A handwritten note underneath. "Maya, I hear you have a child now. Congratulations. Perhaps it's time you remember who you are." "Father." Her laugh was small and bitter, the kind that tasted like the end of something. Her father, the man who disowned her for protecting the family name, was now fundraising for underprivileged children. The satire was too rich even for her. That night, after Liam and Sophia had gone to bed, Maya sat by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. The bakery downstairs was closing. Somewhere far away, violins might have been playing, or maybe it was just memory. Her father's world hadn't changed. But she had. And for the first time, her silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a weapon she'd been sharpening all along. "Have you ever been made to feel less than?" her voice would ask the night itself. "Good, then you'll understand what comes next." Because sometimes revenge doesn't arrive in rage. It arrives dressed in composure, carrying a glass of champagne, smiling just like the people who once destroyed you. 8 years. That's how long it took before Maya decided to try. Not to forgive, she wasn't naive, but to allow her daughter the illusion of a grandfather. It was Sophia who started it. She came home from school one afternoon, waving a family tree worksheet. "Mum, we're supposed to put grandparents here," she said, tapping the page with her pen. "We've only got Grandma Aliner. Don't I have a grandpa too?" Maya had smiled, that slow, careful smile mothers wear when they're deciding whether to tell the truth or protect the child's heart. "You do, love. He's just a bit far away." "Far like Nigeria?" Sophia asked, frowning. "Far like manners," Maya said softly. That night, she sat by the window long after Liam had fallen asleep. The Kingsley invitation card, the one from the charity ball, still sat on her desk, unopened. The hypocrisy of it used to make her laugh. Now it only made her tired. Maybe, she thought, this ends if I end it. So she wrote him. Not a plea, not an apology. Just a note, neat and brief, the kind of letter his generation respected. "Father, I thought perhaps it's time you met your granddaughter. Her name is Sophia. She has your eyes, unfortunately for her. I'd like her to know at least one story about where she comes from that isn't written by society pages. We can meet somewhere neutral. Tea at Claridge, perhaps I'll come alone. Maya." She sent it on a Monday morning. For a week, there was nothing. Then an envelope arrived. Heavy paper, embossed crest, the Kingsley signature scent of wealth and distance. "My dear Maya, how thoughtful of you to reach out. I hope life has been comfortable in your chosen circumstances. While I am pleased to hear of your daughter, I do not believe a meeting would be appropriate at this time. I would not wish to confuse her with notions of privilege that no longer concern her upbringing. Do take care. Father." Maya read it 3 times, once in disbelief, once in anger, once in quiet, steady comprehension. The words weren't just rejection, they were surgical, meant to remind her exactly where she no longer belonged. That evening, Liam found her sitting by the window, the letter open on her lap. "Was that from him?" he asked. She nodded. "He doesn't want to confuse our daughter with privilege." Liam frowned. Translation, he doesn't want to admit she exists. Maya smiled thinly. Exactly, he's allergic to anything real. She tore the letter in half, then again, until the paper looked like snow drifting onto the floorboards. Sophia came in a few minutes later, holding her drawing pad. "Mummy, can I show you my picture?" Maya blinked, forcing a smile. "Of course, darling." It was a family portrait, stick figures with bright crayon hair. "Mummy, Daddy, and me," Sophia said proudly. "Do you like it?" Maya pulled her close. "I love it more than anything." But that night, when the flat was quiet and London hummed outside, something inside Maya shifted. She'd spent years convincing herself that silence was peace, that walking away made her the better person. But now she saw it clearly. Silence hadn't made her free. It had made her invisible. Her father's power wasn't money, it was narrative. He controlled how the world remembered. And if there was one thing Charles Kingsley loved more than prestige, it was praise. He built his empire on image, the generous benefactor, the dignified patriarch. His reputation was a cathedral, and the world bowed at its altar. Maya smiled slowly, not bitterly this time, but with purpose. If he worshipped reputation, she would give him a new one. A reputation built on truth, with just enough satire to make it stick like perfume. A few weeks later, she attended one of his charity luncheons. Not as Maya Kingsley, daughter of privilege, but as Maya Torres, interior designer and local creative supporting community housing initiatives. She wore a fitted navy dress, subtle and elegant. Nothing loud, but enough to make people notice without understanding why. When Charles saw her across the room, his glass of champagne stilled midair. "Maya," his tone was cordial, the kind of civility reserved for guests he couldn't legally eject. "I didn't expect you here." "Of course not," she said sweetly. "Your invitation got lost on the way to Camden." A flicker of irritation passed over his face, quickly replaced by a polished smile. "How have you been?" "Oh, thriving," she replied lightly. "Designing homes for families who can't afford to live in the ones your foundation demolishes for redevelopment. It's fulfilling work." The silence that followed was delicious. A few donors, nearby, shifted uncomfortably. Her father cleared his throat. "Always so passionate, my dear. Do take care of yourself." "Oh, I do," she said. "I take great care. You taught me that reputation is everything." And then she smiled, the kind of smile that promised war but looked like grace. That night, she went home and opened her laptop. A blank page. Title: The Gentleman Philanthropist, A Love Letter to Image. A story, thinly veiled as satire. A father who preached integrity, while hiding hypocrisy behind charity. A daughter who watched. And thus began the quietest, most spectacular revenge London society would ever whisper about. It began, as most revolutions do, in the smallest of ways. A single story. Posted online under a pseudonym, M.T. Wren. Liam laughed when she told him the name. "Why Wren?" "Because wrens are small," Maya said, "but they build their nests in impossible places." The story was called The Gentleman Philanthropist. It wasn't personal, not yet. It was about a man, elegant, adored, publicly kind, who collected virtue the way others collected art. He ran charities that saved children from poverty, all while quietly underpaying the workers who made it possible. He loved goodness, so long as it was profitable. The satire was delicate, the kind that London's upper crust liked to call clever. Maya posted it on a digital journal that celebrated social commentary and satire. By morning, it had 500 reads. By evening, 50,000. The comments were divided. "Brilliant allegory. I know exactly who this is about. Surely not the Kingsley Foundation. Haha, unless." Charles Kingsley didn't read it himself. Someone showed him. At breakfast, he was flipping through the Chronicle when a leaner cleared her throat. "Charles, darling, people are talking about an article online." He didn't look up. People are always talking. This one seems pointed. She slid her tablet across the table. The headline read, "The Gentleman Philanthropist, When Charity Wears a Mask." He read the first few paragraphs in silence, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Then, with a faint chuckle, how tiresome, another amateur journalist with class envy. He folded his napkin neatly, as though that closed the matter. "Still," Elinor said softly, "it's rather accurate, almost uncomfortably so." Charles gave her a long look. Accuracy isn't defamation if no one dares name names. He was right, of course. Nobody would. In his world, wealth insulated you not just from consequence, but from belief. Weeks passed. And then another story appeared. The dinner guests. This one was about a family who hosted galas for charity, where guests competed to prove who was the most generous, until someone served hypocrisy as the main course. The writing was sharper this time, funnier, and somehow crueler for how polite it sounded. The Times literary supplement called it wickedly elegant. Influencers quoted it on Instagram with captions like, "Money changes everything, except manners." Maya said nothing. She let the city talk. She went to work. She made breakfast for Sophia. She lived quietly while the stories did the shouting for her. One evening, Liam found her at the dining table, typing. "You're trembling," he said gently. She looked up, surprised. "Am I?" He nodded. "You don't have to do this, you know. He can't hurt you anymore." Maya smiled faintly. "He hurt more than me. He's made cruelty fashionable. I'm just writing the receipts." She paused, staring at the screen. "Besides," she said softly, "he'll never believe it's me. He taught me to sound like him when I write." Soon, journalists began speculating. Who was MT Wren? A former socialite, a disgruntled employee, a moral crusader. The anonymity became part of the intrigue. People debated it over cocktails. The stories spread through whispers and wine glasses until they reached the one place Maya had quietly been aiming for, the Kingsley Foundation's donor circle. At one dinner, a baroness leaned across the table and said, "Charles, darling, have you read these delightful essays skewering men like you?" He smiled thinly. "No need, I live the reality." Everyone laughed, unaware that reality was exactly what was being rewritten beneath their noses. By the fourth story, The Daughters of Dignity, people stopped laughing. Because this one was personal. A daughter disowned at a gala. A father who cared more for reputation than love. The details were poetic, but unmistakable. Even the rain was described the way it had fallen that night. Polite, expensive rain, the kind that cleans the pavements before the rich step outside. Charles read it alone this time, in his study. For the first time, his hand trembled slightly as he turned the page. Elinor entered quietly. "You know it's her, don't you?" He didn't answer. But his silence said everything. The next morning, his PR team advised proactive engagement. The Kingsley Foundation released a press statement. "The stories circulating online are works of fiction, but we at the Foundation remain deeply committed to transparency and integrity." The internet did what the internet does best. It laughed. Memes appeared overnight. Transparency and integrity, sponsored by the Kingsley Foundation TM. And somewhere in Camden, Maya watched it all unfold while stirring sugar into her tea. She didn't smile, not yet. Revenge, she believed, should never look like satisfaction. It should look like justice wearing pearls. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. Subject, "You win." No greeting, no signature, just those two words, cold and trembling on the screen like a truce after a long war. Maya read it once, then again. Her lips curved, not in triumph but in recognition. It had always been inevitable. She didn't open the message immediately. Instead, she made tea jasmine, steeped for exactly 4 minutes, the way her mother used to prefer when she still had softness in her voice. The kettle hissed, the city sighed outside her window, and the early London light brushed her face like an apology. It had been 6 years since that night. The marble, the music, the public undoing. 6 years of rebuilding, learning, remembering. 6 years of teaching herself that revenge wasn't about retribution. It was about reclaiming the narrative. And now, finally, the story was hers. It had started quietly, like all revolutions that work. Not with fury, but with spreadsheets. Haven Co., her nonprofit startup, had grown from a single Camden office into one of the most respected social housing projects in the UK. She had built homes with dignity, designed spaces that didn't just shelter people, but restored their sense of self. Ironically, she'd learned that from Liam, from his way of building things not to impress, but to endure. And it was that quiet endurance that became her strategy. A year ago, a proposal had crossed her desk, a partnership opportunity with the Kingsley Foundation, her father's empire of public generosity and private hypocrisy. Most people would have ignored it. Maya didn't. She read every document, every financial report, every charitable pledge. And beneath the polished mission statements and the pious photos of ribbon cuttings, she found it, the rot. Funds meant for literacy programs had been redirected to consultancy, fees. Donations listed under community redevelopment had found their way into a Cayman account. The Kingsley Foundation had been laundering its virtue, one gala at a time. She didn't expose him, not directly. That would have been too crude. Instead, she sponsored an independent transparency audit across major charities in the city, a move so noble. Even The Guardian ran a glowing piece on it. Within months, auditors stumbled onto the Kingsley discrepancies. And when they did, Maya simply stepped aside and let the system do what it did best when scandal smelled like class betrayal. The morning the news broke, London's papers turned sanctimonious. Headlines splashed across digital feeds. Kingsley Foundation, under investigation for misuse of funds. Beloved philanthropist faces scrutiny over missing millions. Did Britain's most generous family buy its reputation? The public loved him yesterday. By noon, they loved his downfall more. Maya watched it unfold from her kitchen table, barefoot, wearing Liam's old hoodie. The same hoodie she'd cried into the night her father cut her off. Now she wiped her hands on it absently as she scrolled through the articles, the steam from her tea curling like satisfaction she refused to show. Her phone rang, Eleanor Kingsley. Maya hesitated before answering. For a moment, she wondered if her mother would sound angry, ashamed, or relieved. Mother. Maya, Eleanor's voice was brittle. Not the polished silk she remembered, but thin lace stretched too far. Your father, it's all over the papers. The trustees, the donors, they're abandoning him. It's awful. Maya didn't respond. She waited, the way her father used to in board meetings when he wanted the other person to feel small. Then came the question, trembling and raw. Did you have anything to do with this? Maya looked out the window. Camden rooftops glistened from early rain. She could see Sophia's reflection behind her, coloring at the kitchen table, oblivious, innocent. I didn't create the truth, Mother, she said quietly. I just stopped hiding it. Eleanor's breath caught. He's your father. So I'm told. Maya, he's not well. He can't even step outside. People are saying things. People have always said things, Maya interrupted, her tone soft but final. He just preferred it when they were saying them about others. Her mother went silent. Maya almost felt sorry for a woman who'd built her life around a man's reflection and called it identity. Almost. Tell him, Maya said gently, that the world finally sees what I saw that night in Hampstead. And she ended the call. The scandal spread like fog, slow, suffocating, unavoidable. By the end of the week, major sponsors withdrew. By the next, the board had suspended Charles Kingsley pending inquiry. His foundation's logo, once synonymous with generosity, now appeared on news tickers beside words like fraud and misappropriation. Maya didn't need to speak. The city did it for her. when Haven Co. volunteered to take over several of the foundation's unfinished projects. To protect ongoing community investments, the media hailed her as the daughter who rebuilt what her father destroyed. The irony was exquisite. Reporters called it poetic justice. Maya simply called it balance. That Saturday, there was a charity gala, a legacy event once hosted by her father. Now, the invitation came addressed to Mrs. Maya Torres, founder of Haven Co. She attended in a red satin gown that turned heads the way statements never could. The same ballroom, the same chandeliers, the same crowd, only the whispers had changed direction. A woman from the Heritage Guild approached her. "Mrs. Torres, how marvelous to see you leading the charge for integrity in philanthropy. You must be proud." Maya smiled. "Pride's a luxury," she replied, lifting her champagne glass. "I prefer precision." They laughed, unaware the line wasn't a joke. Later that night, while speeches droned on, Maya's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I know this was you, but I suppose I deserve it. CK." She stared at it for a long moment, then locked the screen. Instead of replying, she raised her glass toward the chandelier, a silent toast to poetic symmetry, and whispered under her breath, "Have you ever been made to feel less than?" When she returned home, Sophia was already asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Maya tucked the blanket around her, brushed a curl from her forehead, and smiled faintly. "Mummy, are we rich now?" Sophia mumbled in her sleep. Maya whispered back, "No, sweetheart, we're free." She turned off the light and stood by the window. London stretched before her, vast, unfeeling, and finally equal. She didn't need her father's name. She'd rewritten it. And somewhere in Hampstead, under a collapsing empire of polished lies, Charles Kingsley was learning what she'd known all along. You can't cancel someone who's already reborn. Hampstead was smaller now. Not literally, but in spirit. The streets that once gleamed with Range Rovers and roses now felt like a theater after closing night. The applause was gone, and all that was left was dust and echo. The Kingsley estate stood at the end of a private lane, still beautiful, but faded in the way wealth fades when no one believes in it anymore. The hedges were overgrown. The fountain no longer ran. Even the marble steps seemed tired. Maya parked at the gate and sat for a moment, watching the house that had both raised and erased her. For 6 years, she had imagined this day, sometimes as confrontation, sometimes as vindication. But now, standing before it, she felt none of those things. Just completion. She pressed the intercom. No answer. So she walked through the half-open gate and followed the gravel path that once glittered under party lights. Charles Kingsley was on the terrace, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring out at the gray lawn. His hair had thinned. His posture, once immaculate, had bent slightly, like a structure built on pride that finally met gravity. He didn't look surprised to see her. Only smaller. "Maya," his voice was dry, unused. "You came." She stood still for a moment before stepping closer. "Mother said you weren't well." A faint, humorless chuckle. "I've been better. The doctors call it stress. I call it consequence." He gestured toward a chair opposite him. "Sit, if you're not here to finish me off." "I'm not," she said, taking the seat. "You did that yourself." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy with history. From this terrace, he had once made speeches about legacy and honor. From this garden, she had once watched him entertain men who shaped policy and priced tags with the same hand. Now there were no speeches, no audience, just the wind. "I suppose you think you've won," he said after a while, his voice trembling not with anger but with weariness. Maya studied him, the proud man now learning humility the hard way. "This wasn't a competition," she said softly. "You're the one who made it one." He looked at her, really looked, for perhaps the first time in years. "Do you hate me, Maya?" "I did," she said honestly, "for a long time. And now." She took a breath. Now I just see you for what you are, a man who mistook reputation for worth. He flinched slightly, as if the words were a scalpel. I wanted the best for you. No, she said gently. You wanted the best version of yourself to be reflected in me. He leaned back, eyes glassy. Do you have any idea what it's like to build an empire and watch it crumble overnight? Yes, she said, meeting his gaze. I do, you taught me. A long silence followed, the kind that hums with memory. I read about your company, he said finally. You're doing good work. Maya smiled faintly. Real work, the kind that doesn't need champagne. A ghost of a laugh escaped him. I underestimated you. No, father, she replied, voice calm but cutting. You overestimated yourself. He turned away, staring into the fog. Everyone has left, he murmured. The trustees, the partners, even the staff. Your mother visits, but she doesn't stay long. I can't blame her. Maya looked toward the house, the same windows that once glowed with music and money. Perhaps, she said quietly, it's finally honest. You always said a man is known by who stands beside him. Now you know who truly does. He swallowed, then said something that almost broke the air. You're all I have left. Maya's chest tightened, not from pity, but from recognition. Because once, she had been the one saying those words, standing at the edge of this same terrace, watching him turn away. Now the circle had closed. She stood. You'll survive this, she said, adjusting her coat. Maybe not as a Kingsley, but as a man. He nodded slowly. And you, what will you do now? She paused, then smiled. Keep building. You taught me that too, except I build for people, not for mirrors. He tried to smile back, but it came out more like regret than pride. As she turned to leave, he called out softly, Maya. She stopped. He hesitated, then said, I was wrong. For the first time, she believed him. But she didn't need it anymore. She gave a small nod, the kind you give a man who has finally learned the language of humility too late, and said simply, I know. Then she walked away, down the gravel path, past the gate, into the ordinary world that had become her freedom. By the time she reached her car, the rain had begun again, London's favorite punctuation mark. She looked up, let a few drops hit her face, and smiled. Because some stories didn't end with applause or revenge. They ended with peace. 6 months passed. London moved on, as London always did, swallowing scandals, polishing facades, inventing new obsessions. But in the quiet corners, whispers still lingered. The daughter who rebuilt her father's empire. It wasn't fame. It was something rarer, relevance without apology. Maya walked through the new headquarters of the Haven Foundation. The name officially changed from the Kingsley Foundation 2 months earlier. The rebrand had been discreet, almost surgical. No fanfare, no press conference, just a simple announcement. The foundation will continue its mission to support education and housing for underserved communities, now under new stewardship. The word stewardship had made her smile. Her father had once called her unfit to steward the Kingsley legacy. Now she was literally doing it, only better. The office was open plan, glass, greenery, light. On the wall hung a quote she'd chosen herself. Build as though the next person matters. It wasn't just the organization's motto. It was her philosophy now. Her assistant handed her a schedule, meetings with city planners, an award ceremony invitation, and an unexpected note. Lunch appointment confirmed, EK. Maya paused, Eleanor Kingsley. The restaurant in Kensington was elegant but unpretentious, all warm woods and quiet jazz. Eleanor sat by the window, dressed in her usual understated grace, though her eyes looked older, softer somehow. When Maya approached, her mother stood and hesitated, as if unsure whether to hug her or curtsy. Maya decided for her. She leaned in and embraced her gently. Thank you for coming, Eleanor said, her voice steady but emotional. I'm glad you asked, Maya replied. They sat. For a while, they talked about ordinary things, Sophia's school, the weather, even a new book Eleanor was reading. It was almost normal. Then, inevitably, the silence came, the one filled with everything they hadn't said for years. I visited him, Alina finally said, eyes on her teacup. Your father, he's quieter now, he keeps to himself. He's selling the estate. Maya nodded. That house was built for an audience. He doesn't need it anymore. Alina smiled sadly. No, none of us do. She hesitated before adding, he told me to tell you thank you for not letting the foundation die, for not letting him die with it. Maya looked out the window, where the city shimmered through light rain. I didn't do it for him, she said softly. I did it because the work mattered. Someone had to separate what he built from what he broke. Her mother nodded, and for the first time there was no defense, no tension, just understanding. When lunch ended, Alina reached across the table and held Maya's hand. I lost you once, she said quietly. I'd rather not do that again. Maya squeezed her fingers gently. You won't. For the first time, it wasn't a promise made in guilt, but in peace. Weeks later, Maya stood in front of a new building site, Haven Residences, Southwark. A project funded entirely by the restructured foundation. Affordable homes, green spaces, and, at her request, a public library dedicated to community development. On its cornerstone, freshly engraved, were the words, for every person ever told they weren't enough. She ran her fingers over the letters, feeling their weight. Not grief, not revenge, just truth. That evening, at home, Sophia sat on the living room floor building tiny houses out of Lego bricks. Look, Mummy, she said, holding up one of them proudly. This one's yours. Maya smiled, kneeling beside her. It's beautiful. Sophia frowned, rearranging a few blocks. But I think it needs a garden. Maya laughed softly. You're right, everything does. Later, as she watched her daughter fall asleep, she realized something. Her father had built monuments. She was building continuity. And somewhere quietly, that felt like victory. Before bed, she checked her emails. Among the reports and updates was one unread message, forwarded from her mother. From Charles Kingsley. Subject, the house is gone. Body. I kept one thing, the photograph of you at 10, holding your first sketchbook. You said you'd build a world of your own one day. You did. I hope you let me see it sometime. Maya stared at the screen for a moment, then closed the laptop gently. Some debts didn't need to be collected. Some punishments were already complete. She walked to the window and looked at the city, alive, imperfect, hers. The rain had started again, steady and soft. London's way of washing things clean. Have you ever been made to feel less than? Because sometimes, the most elegant revenge isn't destruction. It's reconstruction. London, 10 years later. The rain hadn't changed, still as theatrical as ever, still turning the pavements into mirrors. But the city's rhythm had softened. The chaos of ambition now hummed alongside something gentler, the pulse of people who decided that peace was, in fact, a kind of wealth. Maya Torres walked through the courtyard of Haven Square, a community development that had, over the years, become both landmark and symbol. Children raced through puddles. Laughter spilled from the open-air cafe. A mural of flowers, painted by local artists, stretched across a wall bearing a single inscription. Everyone deserves a foundation. She paused there sometimes, like she did now, tracing the painted petals with her fingertips. The Kingsley name no longer hung over her life like a title or a curse. It existed only in footnotes, in old headlines yellowed by time. Her world was self-built block by block, choice by choice. And that, she thought, was the most poetic revenge of all. Inside the community center, an event was underway, the annual Haven Lecture on Social Design. The auditorium buzzed with warmth, filled with architects, students, and community leaders. Today's guest speaker was Dr. Sophia Torres, an urban sociologist whose research had reshaped housing policy across the UK. Yes, Sophia. No longer a child with Lego bricks and wide eyes, but a poised, confident woman of 24. Her curls framed her face like her mother, her voice calm yet sharp, a quiet authority. Maya watched from the second row, her hands folded in her lap. It wasn't pride that filled her, it was recognition. The sense that something right had been set in motion and continued to move even without her pushing it. Sophia stood at the podium. "The idea behind community architecture," she said, "isn't charity, it's equality. It's about building places that say, you belong here, even if the world once told you otherwise." Her words floated across the hall, soft but unshakable. Maya blinked, and for a fleeting second, she saw her younger self reflected in her daughter, that same determination, but free of the weight she once carried. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous, it was sincere. The kind that fills a room, rather than shakes it. After the lecture, Sophia found her mother by the window. "Did I sound nervous?" she asked, smiling shyly. "You sounded honest," Maya said. "That's rarer than confidence." They walked together toward the courtyard. The evening air was damp with the scent of lilac. "Mum," Sophia began, "I've been thinking about expanding Haven's model abroad. Maybe Ghana or Morocco, places where class divides still decide who gets dignity." Maya looked at her, really looked, and saw not just ambition, but understanding. "Do it," she said simply. "Build beyond borders, just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That you build for people, not applause." Sophia nodded. "Always." They strolled in silence for a while, past the rows of benches and gardens that had replaced what used to be an abandoned factory lot. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. This land had once been owned by one of her father's business partners, sold off after the scandal, and reclaimed years later by Haven Foundation to create exactly what Charles Kingsley never understood: community. A gentle kind of victory, the kind that didn't announce itself. At home that night, Maya sat by the window of her flat, smaller than her childhood mansion, but infinitely more real. The city lights shimmered like memory. She opened an old wooden box on the table, the one she kept tucked away at the bottom of a drawer. Inside were just 3 things. The torn halves of that unsigned check her father once sent. A photograph of her and Liam, taken outside their first apartment above the bakery in Camden. And a letter yellowed, edges soft, written in her father's elegant, old-fashioned hand. "Maya, if there is grace in failure, I learned it from you. I hope you teach your daughter how to build better than I ever did. CK." She folded it gently and set it aside. He passed away 2 years earlier, quietly, without scandal this time. And for all the years of anger between them, she'd attended the small service, not for him, but for herself. Forgiveness wasn't for the forgiven, it was for the free. Outside, thunder rolled softly, the kind that comes before cleansing rain. Maya leaned back, her reflection blurred in the glass, and smiled. Her father had tried to define legacy through lineage and status. She'd redefined it through impact and empathy. And her daughter, well, she was expanding it further. That was the real inheritance. Down in the street below, a boy laughed as he splashed through a puddle, his mother shouting after him with mock annoyance. Maya watched them disappear around the corner and whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to time itself. "Have you ever been made to feel less than?" She smiled. Because now, she knew the answer, and she'd built a world where no one else had to ask it. Have you ever been made to feel small because of where you came from, or who you loved? Tell us your story below. We read them all. And subscribe to Everyday Dramas if you believe that sometimes the best comeback isn't loud. It's living well enough that they hear the silence.